Founders of Alexandria. By Star Scribe. Part 3. Moriah. Chapter 5. I've already explained, you can't get in yet. Reactor is in pre-start sequence. Moriah paced back and forth by the parked hummingbird, growing increasingly frustrated. For instance, she wasn't really by the hummingbird, since they had been told to retreat to a distance of 500 meters or greater, while the HPI people did something remotely using the something or whatever. She hadn't really caught any of it. It didn't bother her there were pre-flight checks to run, didn't bother her that it might take even an hour or more to get flying. Actually, that had been a relief when she first heard it. She wanted every second she could to tear through the manuals and find the most basic information. For instance, how to activate its internal autopilot and maintain a constant height. A few bits of simple knowledge, even if they wouldn't let her actually do any flying herself, might save their pony butts from even a serious technical fault. She couldn't get on board to look at it, though, because the pre-flight procedure had already started by the time she drove there, and they absolutely couldn't under any circumstances get closer than 500 meters. I'm not going to try and fly it, she explained, as simply as she could. I'm not going to be doing anything to draw power. I won't even start the main computer. I just need one of the maintenance terminals to open a damn PDF. Which I wouldn't need to do if your damn operating system let us access the documentation. The manuals are classified, but I think you... Yes, classified. She glared at the phone Joseph held in his magic for her, as though doing so might cause it to combust using the force of her anger alone. If she had a horn, it might have. Because the goddamn commies might steal your autonomous nuclear VTOL designs. Better yet, the ponies. We clearly have the technical skill to build nuclear aircraft. The speaker on the other end, a cheerful woman named Taylor Gamble who seemed to grow frustrated right along with Moriah, replied in a near shout. It's a damn unshielded nuclear reactor, horsehead. That gave her pause, suddenly conscious of the stares of her friends around her. They had moved all their supplies, enough food and water and camping gear to last for a week, into a pile so far away from the farmhouse they were near the road. Hey! Think about it, if you can, Taylor continued over the phone. Nuclear fuel has some of the best energy-to-weight ratio in the world, short of topping the thing up with antimatter. Problem is, shielding a reactor is heavy. The reactor on a hummingbird or an albatross has thermal shielding only. The body is insulated, but only minimally. If you step into a hummingbird before pre-flight is complete, you'll be glue. When Alex had given her the phone and introduced the engineer on the other end as a friend, Moriah hadn't realized that would translate to constantly reminding her she was a pony. It almost made her upset enough not to take what the woman was saying seriously, even though the warning was clearly not the sort she should ignore. If there's an unshielded nuclear fission reaction happening under my feet, how is a pre-start sequence going to stop us from being cooked alive? The woman on the other end sighed deeply, exasperated. This is an HPI hummingbird, Moriah Strickland. Like all HPI vehicles, it's equipped with a CGA. CPNFG. Look, it makes a sphere where energetic radiation of all kinds gets neutralized. We've reconfigured this one only to produce a shielding radius large enough for the reactor itself once it's cleaned up all the radiation it made getting started, but until it's running, it's not safe to go inside. Do you understand? Moriah didn't answer for several seconds, letting her own heart settle down. Maybe it was possible she had let her emotions get the better of her over something minor. Yes, Ms. Gamble, I understand. I apologize for being difficult. I think the stress of being asked to fly this thing is getting to me. She considered for a moment, forcing herself back to neutrality. She would have meditated if she thought she had the time. She knew she didn't, though. These communicators of yours can send data too, right? Could you send me the hummingbird manuals? I'm nowhere close to ready to fly this thing. The instant Moriah calmed down, the voice on the other end seemed to relax too. Sure. We're not supposed to send HPI data anywhere outside the network, but your communicator isn't off the network, is it? A second later the communicator's screen lit up again, informing them a PDF had just been downloaded. Couldn't pay me to fly one of those death traps, even if I had the certs for it. Moriah sat down, gesturing for Joseph to release the phone. He did, and it dropped right out of his levitation into her waiting hooves. Sorry again, Gamble. She clicked the phone off before the HPI engineer could respond, taking a stylus in her mouth and beginning to navigate the screen. A few hours later she was in the pilot's seat, flying what might very well be the most sophisticated machine humans had ever built that hadn't been designed to travel into space. She didn't really consider it flying, since she knew absolutely nothing of what was happening and would have had little recourse at all except in the most basic of malfunctions. While in operation, the screens that represented her windows filled with images of the outside, superimposed with maps and instruments and readouts. The Hummingbird made an absolute mockery of FAA safety standards. There wasn't a single analog redundancy in the entire cockpit, nor was there a single non-digital control. The operations manual actually justified the design choice, albeit it somewhat cynically. In the event of a central computer failure, the CPNFG unit will immediately cease operating. The 4 seconds needed to accumulate a lethal level of exposure was not deemed a sufficient time to safely land and evacuate. There were dozens of levels of digital redundancy and protection she didn't understand. Remote piloting itself was a redundancy, meant to supplement the onboard supercomputer. The manual went on and on about its command stream being sent in real time for automatic and human verification back in Central, with the remote host taking over if the slightest discrepancy was detected. Even still, she felt uneasy. How long would it take to bounce a light-speed signal off a satellite and back to Earth, then process the input, then bounce another signal back? She sat behind controls she didn't really understand, thinking of how significant a difference of a few seconds response time could really be. Answer? Way more than she liked. If their onboard computer malfunctioned, or miscalculated, they would all be very dead. For once, she was the cheerful one. She didn't want to convey to the others just how vulnerable and completely suicidal this felt, so instead she just looked stoic and answered any questions they gave her with a nod. She had already protested, and they had ignored her protests. A pilot is always calm and collected, she told herself, feeling neither. I will be at my best and most able to respond to threats when I retain control of my emotions. It was no easy task, but she managed. Up until the sirens started. Took her nearly 10 seconds of scanning to locate the icon, one of a dozen different unfamiliar symbols on the electronic display. Of course, by the time she had found it, verbal warnings had started. Warning, thermic spike detected. Active compensation will reduce operative thrust. Engage. Yes. Moriah screamed at the display, searching wildly for whatever might be causing the computer to scream at her. She felt a sudden jolt of acceleration, not enough to jar her from her restraints, but probably enough to knock someone into a wall if they weren't prepared. She felt the aircraft start to descend, stubby wings slowing them only slightly in the absence of power. Then she looked up, and saw what had set the computer to protesting. No, it wasn't anything Joseph was up to and back. The HPI had, as they had patiently explained, set the internal thermic radiation sensors to their lowest possible level. The readings were coming from outside, and Moriah could see why. There in the sky, coming straight at their aircraft, was a dragon. A conflagration in the air, roaring blue and purple and green flames with runes blurring almost too fast to read along its back. It was a long, elegant beast, with fins running along the spine of its transparent body, like something Moriah might have seen in a Chinese New Year parade. There was no time to think. She checked the altitude, 65,000 feet and dropping, searching for the controls and not finding them. The dragon was heading straight for them. A sturdy aircraft like this might be able to take a great deal of punishment. But flying through the body of a fiery serpent? Still, she had a hunch. "Pilot override," she shouted, using the words she had been explicitly told not to use under any circumstances. "Divert all power to the CPNFG. Engines, life support, communications, anything but the computer. Give me the biggest, strongest field you can." Command acknowledged. The deceleration wasn't as sudden this time. The lights above her went out, and somewhere above her the constant roar of jet engines abruptly died. No pumps recirculating the air, no fans, no music from the cargo area. Only the distant, sonorous hum of the reactor remained, like the heartbeat of the world. That, and the rush of air from outside, and the terrified screams from the cargo compartment. As she watched, the pinnacle of human technical achievement began its battle with a sudden onslaught of supernatural might. Below her hooves, the energy of an ancient supernova was coaxed out into a soup of boiling salt, and over only a few moments, into the superconductor running the length of the ship. That energy poured into intricate coils of composite wires, reflectors around the magnetic bottle that contained at its very center a glob of exotic matter. Trillions of calculations a second modulated the wave of energy pouring into the CPNFG. As the dragon neared them, opening its jaws wide to swallow the hummingbird whole, Moriah felt a sudden wave of emptiness wash over her, deeper and more complete than anything she had felt in her life. She saw what happened next as if from far away. The wave was invisible, yet she saw it strike the dragon. Runes and teeth and scales alike were shredded to nothing, leaving only a vague haze in the air. That, and a torrential vortex of air. Perhaps the hummingbird might have breached it without faltering, but that was before. Now they had slowed down to subsonic speeds, lost the split-second corrections of the supercomputer and the connection to the HPI's secret bunker. They were slammed to one side, and Moriah was suddenly hanging from the ceiling. She was spinning, seeing red then black then red again, and knew she might lose consciousness at any moment. She had to cancel her previous commands or they would all die, perhaps even more painfully than the death the transparent sky spirit might have brought them. Apathy surrounded her. Pain crushing her, an avalanche of blaring alarms and rushing air. Through it all returned an old voice, that same one that had been speaking to her in the forest. "It will be easier now than ever," it told her. "Simply do nothing. No one will know you meant it to happen. It won't even be that painful, not really. A few more seconds and you'll be unconscious anyway." In the crushing emptiness, Moriah felt a brief flicker of magic. It didn't come from outside, it didn't even leave her body. It was the same spark she had felt the first time she had really felt magic. Vibrant and beautiful, it lasted only a second before the overwhelming crush of the field swallowed it and left her empty again. That second was all she needed. "Disregard previous command," she shouted, praying the computer could understand her over all the alarms and the screaming from behind her and the air. "Restore the engines and resume previous heading." In the world she knew, even the most experienced pilots would have difficulty escaping from a crash now. The miles of the altitude were only prolonging the inevitable, and even then not for long. 70 tons of metal and composite might withstand the colossal forces acting on them now, or they might be ripped apart before they even met the ground. Too fast a correction would guarantee that kind of death. Too slow, and she wouldn't be able to correct in time. But Moriah wasn't the one making the correction. Their onboard supercomputer might not know the first thing about what to do in the event of a magical fire dragon attack, but it knew exactly how to recover from a runaway descent. The engines roared back to life, acting in perfect, gradual concert with the flaps and the rudder and even the props. Thousands of gradual movements, each perfectly timed, brought the hummingbird out of its meteoric descent, at an altitude that couldn't have been more than a few hundred meters. That was when she really heard the screams.